Right now, in 2026, at least 10 towns across Europe are losing their last residents. This is not ancient history, and not a war you half remember. It is happening this decade. Some of it is happening this year. We like to think of abandoned places as finished, firmly in the past. Then, on the 10th of November 2023, the ground beneath the Icelandic town of Grindavik split open in the night, and almost 4,000 people drove away and did not come home. Stay to number 1. The streets there have lava in them. Most of these places did not empty in a single afternoon. They emptied slowly, while the rest of the continent was looking somewhere else. We are starting with the slowest of them all. Number 10. Doel, Belgium. On the west bank of the Scheldt, in the shadow of a nuclear power station and the cranes of the second busiest port in Europe, there is a village of red brick houses where almost nobody lives. Doel is more than 700 years old. One of its houses once belonged to the family of the painter Peter Paul Rubens, and a 17th century windmill still stands on the dike above the river. For most of its life, it was an ordinary Flemish fishing and farming village, but Antwerp wanted the land. In the late 1960s, the authorities banned any new building in Doel in case they ever needed to clear it. In 1998, the regional government decided to do exactly that, to make room for a new dock. They offered to buy people out, and most took the money and left. A small number refused. They stayed, they went to court, and for more than 20 years they fought the demolition of their own village and, against the odds, kept winning. By 2020, the head count was 18. The empty houses were boarded with steel plates, painted by visiting street artists, broken into and burned. A truce in 2022 finally let Doel stay on the map, and former residents can now even buy their houses back. About 20 people live there today, in a village built for hundreds, beside a port that is still hungry for the ground they are standing on. Doel was emptied by a plan. The next place was emptied on purpose, and then taken apart piece by piece. Number 9. Sveagruva, in the Norwegian Arctic. Well north of the Arctic Circle, hundreds of miles from the mainland, on the islands of Svalbard, there was a coal town called Svea. Today, there is a field of Arctic grass and nothing else. Svea was founded by Swedish miners in 1917, at the head of a long fjord with no road to anywhere. For most of the 20th century, it pulled coal out of the mountains, and at its peak, it was the third largest settlement on Svalbard, after Longyearbyen and the Russian town of Barentsburg. Nobody lived there permanently. Around 300 miners flew or commuted in, worked their shifts, and went home again. The coal ran down, and the politics changed. In 2017, the Norwegian government decided to close the Svea mines for good. But instead of simply locking the doors and walking away, Norway did something almost no country does with an abandoned town. It deleted it. Over the next 6 years, the state mining company demolished the buildings, lifted out the heavy machinery, pulled up the roads, and removed the airport. The landscape was returned as closely as possible to the way it had looked in the 1940s. It became the largest environmental cleanup Norway had ever attempted. A brand new mine, fully built and ready to open a fresh coal seam, was sealed up without ever producing a single shift. By the autumn of 2023, the last crew flew out, and the official population of Svea became 0. Most ghost towns are what is left behind when people stop caring. Svea is the opposite. It is a town that was carefully, expensively unmade. The next one is being unmade too, but by water and by poison. Number 8. Geamana, in the mountains of central Romania. If you drive up into the Apuseni Mountains and look down into the Sesi Valley, you will see a lake the colour of rust and chemical turquoise and dead grey, and rising out of the middle of it, the tip of a church spire. Geamana was a farming village of more than 1,000 people. In 1978, the government of the dictator Nicolae Ceausescu found something underneath the next valley along. The Rosia Poieni mine holds one of the largest copper deposits in Europe, and to extract copper at that scale, you produce vast quantities of toxic sludge. The sludge had to go somewhere, therefore Geamana had to go. Around 400 families were ordered out. They were promised a new village nearby. Most were moved more than 60 miles away with very little money, and the dead were left where they lay. Then the valley was sealed with a dam, and the waste began to flow in. It has been flowing ever since. The lake of mine tailings is acidic, laced with cyanide, and it rises by roughly a metre every year. House by house, street by street, garden by garden, it has swallowed the village whole. Only the spire of the church still breaks the surface, and it sits a little lower every season. A few years ago, the mining company drew up plans to pull the spire down, to be rid of the last thing standing in its lake. The people who had been moved out refused to let it go, and for now the spire still stands. About 20 people still live on the slopes above, watching their old home drown in slow motion. The next place is dying slowly too, only it is doing it under its own weight. Number 7. Civita di Bagnoregio in central Italy. About 75 miles north of Rome, a small medieval town sits alone on top of a pillar of soft volcanic rock, connected to the rest of the world by a single long footbridge and nothing else. The Italians have a name for it, La Città che muore, which translates to the town that is dying. The Etruscans founded it well over 2,000 years ago, on a plateau that was once 3 times the size it is now, and home to around 3,000 people. But the rock it stands on is tufa, soft and crumbling, sitting on softer clay, and the land has been falling away from the edges for centuries. An earthquake in 1695 took a whole section of the town. The cliffs keep retreating, and the houses keep going over the side. The footbridge itself is younger than you might guess. The original land bridge eroded away, and the last connection by road was blown up by retreating German troops in 1944. The slim concrete walkway that visitors cross today went up in the 1960s, and the town has since been placed on a global watch list of the 100 most endangered places on Earth. By the 1920s, the population was down to 600. Today, fewer than a dozen people live in Civita all year round. And here is the strange part. Up to 1 million tourists a year now pay to walk across that footbridge and watch a town die, which is just about the only thing keeping it alive. If you are finding these as quietly unsettling as I am, hit subscribe, because there is a new one of these every few weeks from every corner of Europe. And keep watching, because the places left on this list did not fade over centuries. Some of them emptied in a single day, which brings us to a town that is not eroding and not drowning. It is simply running out of people. Number 6, Valdeprado, in the province of Soria, Spain. By the most recent count, in 2024, 8 people live in Valdeprado. It is a village of old stone houses high in the hills of northern Soria, near a mountain pass, and it is tied for the smallest population in the entire province. There is no single disaster here. Nothing has flooded it, undermined it, or buried it. Soria is one of the most thinly populated corners of the whole of Europe, with about 9 people for every square kilometre, roughly the same as Lapland. This is the heart of what the Spanish call La España Vaciada, the emptied Spain. The mechanism is quiet and almost impossible to stop. The young leave for Madrid and the coast because there is no work. The school closes because there are no children. The bus stops coming, then the clinic, then the last shop. Therefore, the people who are left, mostly the old, have one more reason to go, and one day the village simply ends. Spain's own statisticians estimate that nearly 1 in 7 of the country's municipalities is now at risk of vanishing altogether. Valdeprado is not being destroyed, it is being subtracted, one funeral at a time. Number 5. Lützerath in Western Germany. That is one way for a town to disappear, slowly by subtraction. The next one disappeared because a government and a mining company agreed that it should. 20 miles west of Düsseldorf, on the lip of one of the largest open-pit lignite mines in the world, there used to be a tiny farming hamlet of about 100 people. The giant excavators of the Garsweiler mine had been creeping toward it for years, eating the landscape one field at a time. Lützerath's residents were bought out and relocated by the energy company that owns the mine, most of them by 2017. The last farmer left at the end of 2022. But the empty houses did not stay empty. Climate activists moved in, occupying the abandoned buildings and tree houses to stop the coal beneath the village being dug up and burned. Then, in October 2022, the German government struck a deal. 5 neighbouring villages would be saved, and the company agreed to bring the end of coal burning at the site forward to 2030, 8 years earlier than planned. In exchange, it could have Lützerath. And so in January 2023, more than 1,000 police officers moved in to clear the protesters in the rain and the mud, while around 6,000 people, some of them among the best-known climate campaigners in Europe, demonstrated at the edge of the fields. Within days, it was over. The activists were carried out, a perimeter fence went up, and the village of Lützerath, with its houses, its streets and its church, was demolished and fed into the mine. There is one town still ahead of us that did not get years of warning or even days. It got a few hours. We are getting closer to it. Number 4. Kiruna in Swedish Lapland. Kiruna is not being abandoned to ruin. It is being moved. The whole town is being moved 2 miles to the east, building by building, because the ground it stands on is no longer safe. Kiruna sits above the largest underground iron ore mine on the planet, which opened in 1898, and is the only reason the town exists at all. But the deeper the mine goes, the more the ground above it cracks and sinks, and Swedish law does not allow mining directly beneath occupied buildings. The mine wanted the ore under the town. Therefore, the town had to leave. Since 2004, Kiruna has been relocating itself in one of the strangest urban projects in modern Europe. A brand new town centre opened in 2022. Homes, shops and historic buildings have been lifted onto trailers and driven to the new site, while the old centre is steadily demolished behind them. The most extraordinary moment came in August 2025. The town's beloved wooden church, a 670-ton building from 1912, was jacked up whole, lowered onto a platform with 224 wheels, and driven 5 kilometres across town at half a kilometre an hour, while the King of Sweden and 10,000 people watched it crawl past. The church was no ordinary building to move. Swedes had once voted it the most beautiful building in the whole country from before 1950. It was also far from the first to make the journey. More than 20 of Kiruna's historic structures had already been lifted and carried to the new town before the church took its turn. Kiruna is a town outrunning the hole it dug. The next 2 could not run at all. Number 3, Brienz, in the Swiss canton of Graubünden. Not the famous lakeside town of the same name, but a tiny mountain village of fewer than 100 people in the Eastern Alps. Brienz has a problem that is difficult to imagine living with. The entire village is sitting on a slow-motion landslide. The ground beneath the houses has been sliding downhill since the last ice age, and in recent years it has sped up, while 2 million cubic meters of rock on the mountain above has begun to come loose as well. In May 2023, the villagers were ordered out. Weeks later, in June, a vast mass of rock tore down the mountainside and stopped just short of the houses. They had escaped, barely. But the ground kept moving. Therefore, they were evacuated again in 2024, and again in 2025. And in 2026, the danger zone was widened further still. And so, the people of Brienz live in a way no settled town should have to. They are allowed home when the mountain is quiet, and ordered out when it stirs, packing the same bags over and over, never knowing which departure is the last one. Remember the lava. In the streets I promised you at the start. We are nearly there, but Brienz, for all its waiting, is at least still standing. The next village is not, because in Switzerland, in 2025, one of these slow-motion threats stopped being slow. Number 2. Blatten, in the Lützerath Valley, Switzerland. Blatten was a postcard. A village of timber houses and a white church, around 300 people, in a green alpine valley beneath a hanging glacier called the Birch. For weeks in May 2025, geologists watched that mountainside coming apart. Rock was crashing onto the glacier, and the ice was cracking under the weight. They did not wait. Between the 17th and the 19th of May, the entire village was evacuated, people and livestock both, with cows airlifted out by helicopter. 9 days later it happened. On the 28th of May, at 24 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, the Birch Glacier let go. Around 3 million cubic meters of rock and ice came down the mountain at speeds approaching 200 kilometers an hour. It was buried. Roughly 90% of Blatten, around 130 houses and the church, vanished under the debris in moments. One man, a shepherd of 64, who had stayed outside the evacuation zone, was never found. The mayor stood in front of the cameras the next day and said that they had lost the village, but not the community. The debris then dammed the river, and a new lake began to rise over whatever was left. Blatten had 9 days of warning, and it still lost everything. The town at number 1 had almost none, and it is the only place on this list where you can still watch the thing that emptied it, glowing in the dark. Number 1. Grindavik, on the Reykjanes Peninsula in southwest Iceland. For 800 years, this corner of Iceland slept. The Reykjanes Peninsula had not seen an eruption since the Middle Ages, and Grindavik grew up on top of that long quiet as an ordinary fishing town. Almost 4,000 people, a harbour, a church, schools, a swimming pool. It landed a large share of Iceland's fish, and just up the road sat the Blue Lagoon, one of the most famous tourist spots in the country. Then, in 2021, the peninsula woke up. At first, the eruptions were a spectacle, safely out in empty valleys, drawing crowds with their slow rivers of orange. But the magma was working its way toward the town. On the 10th of November 2023, a corridor of molten rock around 15 kilometers long forced its way underground, directly beneath Grindavik. The town tore. Roads split, pavements buckled, and long black cracks opened down the middle of residential streets, some of them swallowing whole sections of ground. That night, almost 4,000 people were given a few hours to gather what they could and go. They have not truly returned. In December 2023, the first eruption broke out just north of the town. In January 2024, the lava reached Grindavik itself, crossed the defences, and set houses on fire. Engineers threw up enormous walls of earth, now 14 kilometres long and up to 25 metres high, to steer the lava away from what remained. The eruptions kept coming anyway, 9 of them in the crater chain by the summer of 2025. The walls were not only there to save the houses. Just outside the town sit the Svartsengi power station and the Blue Lagoon, which together supply electricity and hot water to tens of thousands of people across the peninsula. A direct hit there would have left whole towns cold and dark, so the barriers had to hold for the living region as much as for the emptied one. The Icelandic state has now bought more than 950 homes in Grindavik, over 90% of the town. A working community of 4,000 people has in barely 2 years become a place owned by the government and lived in by almost no one. It is the most disruptive eruption Iceland has faced since 1973. And here is what makes Grindavik different from every other place on this list. The others were emptied by things that are finished, or slow, or human. Grindavik was emptied by a force that has only just begun and may not stop in our lifetimes. On a dark night, from behind the safety of the barriers, you can still watch the reason the town is empty rise glowing out of the ground a few miles away. The cracks are still in the streets. The houses are still standing. And nobody knows if anyone is ever going home. 10 towns then, all losing their people at the same time on the same continent, for reasons that could hardly be more different. One was taken by a port, one was tidied out of existence by its own government, and others by copper, coal, iron, and erosion. One simply ran out of children. And the last 3 were emptied by the ground itself, sliding, falling, and burning. Europe likes to think of itself as finished, mapped, settled, built, with its ruins safely roped off and its disasters tucked away in the history books. But the map is not finished, and it never was. Somewhere on this continent tonight, a school is closing, a slope is creeping, a last resident is locking a door for the last time. The list of empty places is not a record of the past. It is being written right now, and most of it never makes the news. I have walked a few perimeter fences in my time, and the quietest places are rarely the oldest ones. They are usually the ones that have only just gone still. There are more of these coming from every corner of Europe. Subscribe, and we will go and find them. Thank you.